am Jane Kim, a collaborator in the Supervisors for Teacher Education Network team and a supervisor in UCLA's Teacher Ed program. I hope, like me, you felt energized and invigorated by the great sessions on supervision with a focus on equity and justice that we had yesterday. I would like to hand this mic over to Lisa Sullivan, who's done a fantastic job of running this conference, and she's going to introduce the keynote for today. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane. I really appreciate that activity and just getting us to kind of think about yesterday and what we took away from the conference. It's exciting to see all of you again today. Thanks for coming back for a second day. And okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today. Dr. Shaynce Campbell is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Education. Her research focuses on understanding how policies and practices influence access to learning opportunities for students of color. Her work explores various institutional factors associated with advancing students of color's opportunities to learn, including teachers and teacher education programs. Dr. Campbell's work around teacher education is supported by the National Academy of Education, the Spencer Foundation, and the California Teacher Education Research and Improvement Network, or CTERN. Her work has appeared in American Educational Research Journal, Educational Research, and Race, Ethnicity, and Education. In 2014, Dr. Campbell became the first Black person and woman to earn a PhD in public policy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Campbell was previously a faculty member at UC Irvine, and I learned of her work from colleagues at UCLA and UC Santa Barbara, as they were aware of the research she was conducting on teacher education in California. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Campbell. Good morning and welcome to you.
Well, good morning or afternoon, wherever you are in this space. So we've already done the intro, so I'm just going to jump right in. So today's talk, I want to talk about what does it mean to re-evaluate our work as supervisors, so that we can so that candidates can be their best selves. And before I want to do that, in the spirit of an act of remembering, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I'm coming to you in Pittsburgh from the ancestral and unceded territory of the Clovis, the Haudenosaunee, the Lenape, Shawnee, and other peoples. And as a conference community, I want us to wrestle with and actively engage the fight for the continued injustice, including genocide, ethnic cleansing, and racism experienced by these peoples in other nations. And this is important because in our remembering, we have to remember that we get to live, to work, and to play where we are because these nations cared for and are caring for this land. So I want us to really sit with that idea. So why are we here? So in the spirit of the conference theme and the work that I do, we know that students of color are often schooled in dehumanizing environments, right? And so that's evidenced by unjust and disproportionate discipline referrals, them having less rigorous course placements, teachers and staff holding lower expectations for them, and the ultimate push out of students of color. And so central to these very dehumanizing experiences and traumatic experiences are teachers, right? And so yesterday, Dr. Neese, I don't want to mess up your last name. So Dr. Neese talked about talked to us about how supervisors don't want to push or interrupt whiteness because they want to be liked and to be nice. And that really, I've really been troubling with that over like yesterday and today. And thinking about this idea of wanting to be liked and to be nice. And this wanting to be at ease, right, is creating a schooling system that is a dis-ease for many students of color. And so we are responsible for this. For every image on this screen that you see, we are responsible for this. And we're also responsible for stopping this. And so as I go through, or as we engage in a conversation throughout this talk, I want us to hold these images and the words around responsibility, not only in our minds, right? Because I think we kind of stay in the mind a lot in this academic space. And conferences also keep us in our minds, right? But I want us to hold these images and these words here, right? In our heart. And so, when these things happen, right, we're all accountable for them. So today I want to spend very short amount of time kind of talking through connecting my research around teacher education programs with my research around teacher evaluations, and then connect that to the work that you all do as supervisors, and consider how might we enter this work more self-aware. So that's what we'll do. Just a quick note, I do not look at the chat when I'm talking, so I don't know what's being said, but I do want this to be as interactive as possible. The end will be way more interactive, but if you have questions or thoughts as I go on, please put the raise hand, and then I think Lisa can moderate that and just stop me, and we can kind of engage in more conversation if you have questions or thoughts as I go through this. Okay, so in terms of my work around teacher education programs in equity, I won't go through this in much detail at all, because I feel like this is a whole talk in and of itself. But I just wanted to highlight, like, I had studied several teacher education programs across the UC system. And so the main question that I was interested in was understanding, how do TEPs, how are they designed to foster equity dispositions among candidates? And here, equity dispositions is not, I don't look at it as just around beliefs, but about the ways in which candidates act both within and outside the classroom based on their beliefs to address systemic oppression. And so a part of this work is really anchoring, like, what do we think about when we think about how do we center equity-oriented teacher education programs? And in looking at that, I looked at different features of teacher education programs, whether that included the missions, coursework, structures, field experiences, et cetera, to understand at a higher level, like, what are programs doing and how are they designing for more equity and just-minded, so that the candidates can be more equity and just-minded. So in terms of supervisors, so I'll just focus on my findings around supervisors. A couple of things stood out. One was around racial diversity. Another one was around this tension between racial diversity and cultural competence. And then the third around TEP priorities. So I'll just read a quote from one of the teacher candidates. And they said, "I have two very nice white ladies. But if we're talking about equity, it would be, I don't know if beneficial is the right word, but it just makes sense. Like, let's have supervisors who can talk to us about things, because it's not something that I got from my supervisor. And these things, meaning equity, things around equity and justice. If they don't have the same understanding of equity that we do or that we're learning, they're not going to be able to help guide us and make decisions towards equitable teaching." And so here you see this disassociation between white supervisors and equity or equitable teaching practices. So there's this notion that to be a very nice white lady supervisor means to be disconnected from being able to be equity minded or to know how to help and guide equitable teaching practices. Another candidate says, "For my supervisor, I feel like equity is not a topic that we talk about often. I think she's more, I guess, focused on things like classroom management and different tools to be able to help me understand what I'm doing or make me feel more comfortable doing those things. She has a lot of helpful tips. So here, what I found was that equity is often overshadowed by procedural or technical aspects of teaching. And these are just a couple of quotes from candidates, but it wasn't only the candidates that made this observation. Leaders also saw this to be the case. So this comes from one TEP leader where they say, a pool of supervisors the pool of supervisors we get, they haven't all worked in diverse settings. They're often not people of color. We don't have a lot of hours that we use for professional development. And a lot of the hours are occupied by just training them on all the different procedural things. And they don't even really get exposure to what's going on in courses, which would be helpful, right? Because our curriculum is focused on equity a lot. And we can't ask them to devote more hours than they're already. I mean, they already do extra things like phone calls with students and their candidates crying about how things went or writing letters of recommendation. So they're already really invested. And so again, we see both of the themes coming out again, where white supervisors are disassociated from the ability to think about equity and equitable practices. And we also see how procedural things, quote unquote, like get in the way of us having conversations around equity. What's most interesting to me about these quotes here is the notion that supervisors are really invested, right? And so we have the students who are like, they're really nice. They give me a lot of helpful tips, and they're already really invested, right? And so this lack of understanding of the importance of equity is a through line, right? And so in my view, we can't even begin to have conversations around justice or anti-racism or even liberatory guiding if being a good supervisor means that you don't have an equity lens. I also surveyed the teacher candidates and asked them about whether or not their supervisor was equity-minded in their beliefs, as well as being equity-minded in their practices. And across the board, most candidates, agree that their supervisors were both equity-minded in their beliefs and practices. You do see this idea that supervisors may have equity beliefs that are not translating into practice, right? So you see a slight decline on the percentage of candidates who say that their supervisors was equity-minded in their practices. So let me shift gears and talk about really quickly the work that I do around teacher evaluation systems and teacher evaluation systems as a reform, and thinking about them as a racist reform. And so I'm just going to highlight some of the work that I've done, as well as other scholars, around what do we know about racial inequities and teacher evaluation systems. So one, we know that teachers of color receive lower ratings than white teachers. We also know that Black women receive lower ratings than white women, and Black women also are 2 times more likely to be required to develop a punitive professional development plan as a result of those lower evaluations than their white women counterparts. We also know that across the board, teachers who are assigned to classrooms with a higher proportion of Black and Latinx students, they also receive lower ratings. And who often tends to teach a higher proportion of Black and Latinx students or are Black and Latinx teachers. And then finally, a more recent study just came out that showed that teacher candidates of color receive lower evaluations by their supervisors than white candidates. So here we've seen these findings across geographic spaces, depending across the types of raters, whether it's the principal, the university supervisor or an outside rater. We've seen this across low and high stakes evaluations, different rubrics, et cetera. And we still see the same finding, right? The teachers of color are receiving lower ratings than white teachers. And while, you know, some supervisors may not have time to focus on equity or equitable teaching practices because of procedural or technical things, some supervisors, based on the last research study, seem to have time to focus on the racial identity of the candidate when they're evaluating them. So what do we do about this, right? So, you know, I've just talked about very, very quickly, you know, the work around what's happening in terms of university supervisors in a teacher education program, as well as what's happening to students and the ways in which candidates in the ways in which they're being evaluated. And we know, you know, there's plenty of research from scholars such as Christine Sleeter or Cheryl Mateas, that teacher education programs, which include supervisors, right, center whiteness. But if we are to like think about and create a space for our candidates to be whole and to grow as anti-racist educators, this is going to require that we as supervisors or care field guiders. I just really wrestle with this naming of supervisors. But like if we as care field guiders are to do this work, we must be whole, right? And I think that there was some conversations, and somebody just put in the chat this morning about like you can't decolonize curriculum if you can't decolonize yourself. And so that's so very true. And thinking about our minds, our bodies, and spirits. And so there's a scholar, Dr. Laura, who talks about how the Western society teaches us that we must fragment our identities. And in the academic space, we privilege the mind, right? And so this disassociation from our bodies from our spirits, and our spirits from their minds, like it needs to be, you know, healed so that we can be our whole selves for our teacher candidates. And so in that work, I want us to take a moment and think about, who are you offering to be? So we had a full day yesterday talking about like anti-racism, anti-racist practices, thinking about self a little. So, you know, I don't know to what extent, you know, you were able to really engage in that work, but I want us to kind of spend a moment to engage in the work of, who are you offering to be? And in that, thinking about, why are you doing this work? And also from one of my scholar femtours, Dr. Cynthia Dillard, thinking about, is it possible to heal ourselves, heal our work and our understanding of each other, particularly around race? And so I'm going to be quiet for just a second and allow you all time and space to really think about and meditate on these questions. And then I'll open it up for a conversation. Okay. So anybody want to just share out their immediate thoughts or more reflexive thoughts about, why are you doing this work?
I started doing this work because I wanted to make sure that the next generation of students would have excellent teachers. Mm-hmm. And I thought this was one way to do it. But I want to add something. Yep. Just because some of the supervisors are people of color doesn't mean that they don't have the same issues that you're saying about other people. I mean, I find many people of color that have become so much a part of the system that they don't know how to be their authentic self.
Yes.
So one of the things that I try to make sure when I'm working with candidates is that I'm my authentic self with them so they can be their authentic self with me.
Pat, say a little more to me about, what does it mean to be your authentic self?
Okay, so I was raised in the same educational system everybody else was, right? So I have a tendency to try to make sure that the system continues as it is. That's how I was raised. So I have to watch myself and make sure that I am really who I am, that when I'm talking to a candidate, I don't hide the experiences that I've had. I don't hide the fact that I know that if I'm working with candidates of color, that they may not be getting the same support, the same kind of situation they may be in with students that are not as prepared, and no one's told them that. For example, this past year, I worked with 4 student teachers that were excellent, really working hard, and couldn't understand why their kids weren't doing well. Well, the test scores at the school were in the lower 5% on math, which is what they were teaching, and no one told them that. So they're sitting here giving their best at all times, and nobody bothered to tell them these kids are really low. Yes, you need to give your best, and yes, you need to have high expectations, but you also need to be prepared to give your authentic self and understand that you've been through similar situations and you know who they are. And you need to let down your guard for a second and let them know who you are. That yes, you understand what they're going through. You've been through similar things. That's being my authentic self. I need to let my candidates know that I understand this system and I know it doesn't always work in their favor. And I'm there to support them. And I know that, yes, they need to do their best always, but they're not always getting the support that they need.
So thank you. Thank you for sharing.
I can speak as an artist and activist. I always interview my candidates first about what they see as their strengths in the arts and in all kinds, whether it's informal, in the community, after school, or in their own families. And they often don't consider this experience in the arts culturally when they walk into the classroom. They may have even years of dance background or poetry, performance, whatever, and they don't actually know ways to apply that in the classroom, and so they're not reaching a lot of their students' own arts and cultural interests and community experience in what they've given to their community. So without sharing that part of themselves, they're replicating sort of the academic core and focusing on test results, but they're not seeing how the arts and people's cultural background, racial background, and family backgrounds can actually contribute to everyone's education in the classroom.
Thank you. Janice?
I wanted to be a teacher when I was 5 years old, and my sister left to go to school. But the thing that I'm seeing now is, as I reflect on my life, that I think I was 8 years old when a young girl came to my classroom from Africa. She was white. They left because of Mau Mau uprisings. And I was always terribly jealous of the fact that she'd had such wonderful experiences, that she'd actually lived in Africa. I actually ended up there working, was there for 13 years. And sometimes I have to stop and look at what I've got, what I'm bringing to the classroom. And I think one of the things that we don't do with our candidates and with our students is we don't start off with opening the suitcase and looking at what we're bringing to the room first. We jump in with all our procedures, as is said, and we're not looking at how rich everybody is. Even the ones of us who are ones that we teach who have not had good experiences, they've still got things in their suitcases that they can share with us. And so I'm thinking that that's the side I want to start on when I get into this new supervisory year.
Is thinking about is thinking about what is in your candidates' suitcases.
Yes, what are they bringing to the classroom? What are they bringing to the world first before we start telling them you should do it like this and this is a good idea and so forth? as we should with students, know them and know what they're bringing to the classroom.
So how do you, and this is for like anyone, but like I'm thinking about what you just said, and how. So before we unpack what is in students' suitcases, right? We got to check our own luggage. And so what does it look like for you, Janice, to check your own luggage before you get into the classroom? What is that process? What could that look like?
I'm going to take time to look at all the things I've done with my life, all the things that have gone right and the things that have gone wrong, and what I learned from those. And I feel like I'm trying to be very open to everybody. I'm a person of color, I guess. I was brought up in England. I never knew that in my particular family. We never talked about things like that, and I never felt different from my very blonde adopted sister. So I just want to validate where we come from.
Yeah,
I think that's my first step, to validate that I'm a good person, that I have things to give, and that all the people who I work with, whether they be adults or young people or little children, we all have things to give, and we have a lot to give.
Okay. Thank you for that. One of the things that when you were talking about where we're from, it made me think about what I would do with teacher candidates. Is the first couple of days, because it's just too many, it took a long time, but is to have them do the poem, the Where I'm From poem, right? And really sit and wrestle with that as a community to understand, where so they have a lot of self-reflection in terms of where they're from. And then we get to, as a community, have more insight. One more person.
I'll share.
Okay.
I did this because I have a passion for learning. Being a child of a single parent with a brother who's a former gangbanger, former drug addict, my mom always told me, people could come and take your home. They could take your clothes, they could take your car. The only thing they can ever take away from you is the knowledge that you have in your brain. And that has always motivated me to be who I am today. And because of that, I want to share that passion of learning with my students and teacher candidates, that no matter how bad you may feel, the knowledge that you have is the most precious gift that you could ever have, because it will take you far in life. And the way I unpack my baggage is I always use myself as the example to connect to my students, always. And when my students have not experienced what I have experienced, I try to give them the perspective of where their peers might be coming from. And that tends to create that safe environment for our students. And another thing that I like to do is, when I get siblings, I always tell them, you are not your sibling. You are an individual person, and I will treat you like that individual person.
Let me ask you something, Tina. So like you had me thinking about education, right? And knowledge, and how no one can take that from you. Yes. So how do you, as I'm assuming you're a supervisor.
Yes.
Okay. How do you, as a supervisor, wrestle with and think about the fact that that the knowledge that we receive in the schooling space is more of a Eurocentric knowledge that does not affirm a lot of folks of color's histories? Like so you're helping them learn something, but the something may be maybe a mess, for lack of better words. It may be trash. So what does that undo? What does that part look like?
So what I do in practice and what I've done in the classroom with my own students is I find text or examples that relate to their world. So I show them that Eurocentral knowledge and show them the other knowledge. And sometimes that other knowledge is that street knowledge. And there is a article that we read that's called Hidden Intellectualism that talks about the street knowledge. And that opens up a whole new can of worms for our students. And it validates what knowledge that they have. Because I tell them there is a way to bring your life experiences and other people's life experiences and your street knowledge into the classroom to help you make that connection, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. So I try to tell, I do a lot of the cognitive coaching type of questionings with my teacher candidates. And one of them is, what's the makeup of your classroom? What are the demographics of the school's area? What might be some texts or some activities or some questions that you might ask them to engage them so that they understand what you are teaching them? So they're not looking at you like they're deer stuck in the headlight. I said, and should a student disagree, how might you validate them disagreeing, but also getting them to agree with somebody else? So it's just more of a guiding of put yourself in those shoes. How might you see it from a student perspective? And as a teacher, how might you help foster that engagement and validate with the student voice and student choice?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you everyone for sharing. I just would, one of the things that you just made me think about, Tina, was troubling the language street and thinking about it as cultural knowledge. But thank you for sharing. So last thing, and I'm going to try to reshare this screen. Hopefully you all see it. Okay. All right. So the last thing I want us to think through, work through, write through, and if you need to go grab a piece of paper, that's totally fine. So in addition to thinking about who are you offering to be in this space, I also want us to think about what are you offering to do, right? And similar to like the KWL charts that we, have our candidates work through, I want us to work through something somewhat similar, right? And so as we move towards being, liberatory servant leaders, we have to sit in our mess. And so to begin to reimagine something that is more loving, more care-filled, more beautiful, we have to think about the work that we do and that we want to do. So the first thing I want you to consider is, what are you currently doing to challenge racism in the ways that you guide candidates? And I want you to think about this, not just professionally, but also personally. What are you doing to challenge racism in the ways that you guide candidates? And then after you've thought about that, I also want you to think about, what do you want to do, right? So what are you doing? And then what do you want to do to challenge racism in the ways that you guide candidates? And then finally, what do you need to have in place to do this work that you want to do? And again, thinking about all three questions in terms of not just professional, but also personal. So what are you currently doing? What do you want to do? And what do you need? Like, whether that's, what kind of resources do you need to have in place to do this work of challenging racism? So I'll give you a few minutes to kind of work through and think through these three questions, and then we'll come back and have a fuller conversation about them. So I want like somebody to volunteer to walk us through, what are you currently doing? What do you want to do? And what do you need to have in place to do this work?
About currently doing. One of some things that I have had my student teachers do, just different times throughout whatever it is that we're discussing every week, is I have them ask their parents and their grandparents what their school experience was like. Mm. Did they go to school with kids who were Black, brown, whatever other color, pink with purple polka dots? Did they go to school with kids with disabilities to be able to visit? Afterwards, that's like their little homework assignment. afterwards, when they find out from their parents or from their grandparents the type of school situations where they had gone, then when we come back and I tell them, you know, back when I was in school, because I'm way older than all of them, said there was no such thing as that. They didn't have people of different colors going to school together. They didn't have people with different abilities going to school together. Now, where I lived, my neighbors, we didn't go to the same school. We all went to different schools. Even though we all lived close together, we did not go to the same school together. And then to be able to compare that, their grandparents' time when they went, their parents' time, to now how they are having to mush everybody together and fix lesson plans and, you know, accommodations and all that other kind of stuff. Now, what I want to do is continue making it more and more and more inclusive for them. Say, okay, so now how do you include this kid and this kid and this kid and this kid? This one who's living in a car, this one who's living with a cousin, this one who's in foster care. You know, there's so many different types of kids now. Never used to be. Nobody had divorced parents when I was growing up. I only knew of one person until I got into high school that had a divorced parent. It never occurred to me. And what you need is that just needs time that we usually don't have. You know, by the time you're going to go visit this student and they have so much to do in this other one, and you know, that's the time, that's the part for me. It's not enough time to get in a lot of the conversations, and I don't know how to really make the time. I don't know how other people do it. So I really want suggestions on how to be able to squeeze all of that in.
Anyone want to give some thoughts, suggestions, feedback?
I'd like to contribute.
Yeah.
Okay. That was great what Helen said. Oh, it was just wonderful what everyone shared so far. And I think the question, I wrote down all the questions. I'm going by my notes here. What do you want to do personally and professionally? And I think it's important. In the beginning, you know, because time, we don't have a lot of time, but what I'd like to do in the beginning is to be authentic and present, and to find out, to inquire of the candidates what they need, and begin a process that helps them to unpack their baggage. And I do need to learn how to effectively do that. And I think for me, it's important for all of us. I think it's important to, I love what you said about someone saying, in order to diminish decolonization, we have to decolonize ourselves. Am I saying that right? Am I?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So to become aware, I think it's important of our explicit and our implicit biases, and how to develop a positive mindset is important. And it's important to learn strategies regarding inclusion. And so my mind is just all over the place and thinking about how can, at the beginning, when you are introduced to your teacher candidates, when we do our professional learning communities, is a place where we can start in the beginning to lay a foundation of what specific things need to look like. You know, aside from, we know it's important, the TPEs are important. They need to learn how to, the expectations regarding observations and lesson plans and all that. But in observing or reviewing the lesson plans, to have conversations about how it's important to that your lesson plans and their mindset doesn't include a lot of baggage that needs to be unpacked, or perspectives that need to be checked, biases that they need to be aware of, and all of that is so important. So that's as best I can see it right now.
Thank you, Karen and Helena. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your first name. So one of the things that I'm hearing is around time. We don't have time, right? And thinking, going back and thinking about the work that I've done around like this focus on procedural and technical things, and equity just being, and justice just being in the back, right? And so what would it be like to be radical in reimagining time, right? In a way that you prioritize anti-racism over everything. So what? You don't get to, something. So, like at UCI, we had 10 weeks. 2 weeks out of these 10 weeks, I'm just where I'm from poem, really wrestling, like really engaging and building community. Because to me, like, and that kind of stayed with us. But to me, I don't care about nothing else if you can't sit with self long enough, right? Like you can't be good. I can't be good for my students in teaching them anything else, I feel like, until I have sat with and wrestled with where I'm from and how that comes into play in terms of my teaching as a teacher educator. So I just want us to kind of like start to reimagine and be a little more radical about our use of time. And I get the policies and the politics around it, right? Around there has to be standards and they have to do the TPAs and all of that. But there has to be, like, you have to make time. And if something, doesn't get talked about, okay, it's okay. Like, they will be okay. So I have a hand raised. I'm gonna try not to mispronounce your name either. Miss Edwina?
Yes. Good
Yes.
morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Now, I don't know where this fits in, but I just want to say, I don't know that I've been challenging racism because the topic is new in the program as it relates to supervision of teachers and interns. But I did want to say that I have made it a point to try to highlight the importance of looking at student assets and looking at the whole child. And I think that helps indirectly, that we're looking at the child's culture and their strengths and their background, that type of thing. And it might even bring in a discussion of assessments, formal and informal, because that could be just like a survey or discussion or something like that. So I try to have discussions surrounding responsive teaching. And that usually brings up, covers some of the things that might be related to challenging racism or indirectly. Okay, and having the teachers look at the students, a continual reflection on the students as a person, their behavior, their thoughts, their engagement, that type of thing. And lastly, I was going to say, what I need is, well, of course, I think the university will be providing a little direction, and what the expectation is or what to look for the students. But I wanted to say that I think that sometimes it's not always overt in dealing with this, in addressing these things.
Yes, one thing, and then I'll go to you, Adrian. Clearly. So one of the things that you just made me think about was the fact that you said, I haven't challenged racism because it hasn't been a part of, the university. And so what it made me think about, and thinking about how do we bring our body, mind, and spirits into a space is the ways in which you, and I could be wrong, but the ways in which you haven't been allowed to bring your whole self. For me, visually, you look like a woman of color. Could be wrong. And so to not have race, to not be able to challenge racism as someone who experiences racism because the university doesn't have space for it, I think is not allowing you to be your whole self as a supervisor. So I just want to put that out there in the space to think about. Okay. Let me lower hands. Uh-oh. Adrian?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Yep.
What I have been doing currently, and actually for a while now, is stepping out of spaces where I perceive myself as having power and challenging racism. I think as a classroom teacher, I'm in a position of power. As a supervisor, I'm in a position of power. Teacher candidates, when they're leading their classes in that context, are in a position of power. And I hold this belief and hold myself to the practice of challenging racism when I'm not in those positions of power, because I feel like that's what's essential to really chipping away or dismantling the system. And it has meant, speaking up in social situations where we're not supposed to talk about race. When I hear something that's racist or classic or homophobic, it has meant in a grocery store, just turning my head and intervening with a group of kids, they're high school age, and turning to them and saying, is what you are doing kind? And just let it sit there. I'm just a woman in a grocery store at that point, right? And so I feel like we can do the work of challenging racism in our classroom, but then we also have to be conscious of our ability to do that because we're sitting in power. And what we really have to get to, in my opinion, is challenging racism on all fronts when we're uncomfortable, when we have something to risk or lose, and we don't technically have a platform that someone is gonna defer to us, right? And so that's what I'm currently doing. And what I wanna do is to continue to challenge, teacher candidates and my peers to do the same. Because if we are only speaking up in our classrooms and in our school spaces, then we're really not doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, final thought, Darlene.
Oh, I didn't want to be the final thought, but well, I just really wanted to appreciate the call to reimagine time. And I think something that I was thinking about as I was responding to these 3 prompts is it's almost, I think sometimes if being anti-racist is, the goal is for it to be who we are, right? And so then there's not really a way to bullet point that out exactly, because it's just who we are and what we do and sort of what we embody in our lives. And so I think, to me, like, your challenge to reimagine time was great. Like, for me, because I think those are not in conflict, right? Going over standards or going over classroom management or the TPEs, we can always be reconsidering what we're centering, who we're centering, what's considered the norm. Is the sort of like white middle class norm present in those conversations, or are we naming that and critiquing that? So I feel like we can go over those things. We can go over the TPA and also talk about ways that we might challenge what we consider to be the norm, which is mostly like a white middle class sort of value system. And again, not necessarily white people, because I think as a person of color, as a woman of color, I want to challenge myself to consider the ways that I'm still norming those things. So anyway, I just wanted to reflect on the idea that it's not necessarily something that we should be able to bullet point eventually. Like, we should work to get to the point where we're not bullet pointing those things. And I just so appreciate that call to reimagine time.
All right. Well, I hope that you take these 3 questions into the debrief this afternoon, and really continue to wrestle with these questions. And I just want to leave you just with one thought from my dear sister, friend, and scholar, Dr. Bettina Love, who says that the shift to anti-racism doesn't happen overnight, right? Or after one professional development session. And I'll add, after one conference or an annual conference, that it happens through this process of self-discovery, healing, and learning to reject and to call out racist ideas, racist people, and racist structures. And so anti-racist teaching or supervising or guiding is not an approach or a method, but that is a way of life. So thank you all for really engaging in a conversation this morning. So now I'll turn it over to Lisa if you had any final thoughts or words or instructions.
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That was really, really powerful. And you were so on target with the way you designed your talk and the questions that you posed. And I really do want us to take those up at the end of the day today and be thinking about them as you're listening in on other sessions. So thank you so much.
Thank you
That was
all.
great. And now we have maybe a minute or two to stretch and move around, and then we'll see you in the next session. So thank you so much.